Wow, are you tired of hearing about this game yet? Cause I'm not. This beautiful, amazing piece of work is making me happy to be alive, and I'm so glad that it's being well received. Single player with optional multiplayer that even is gonna have split screen co-op.
Grandma Yankee's pulling out that fucking bomb.
Oh no, Grandma Yankee! No! Grandma, don't do it! Grandma, don't do it! No! Huge character creator with tons of options, looks beautiful, runs great, no microtransactions. Larian's like actually a cool company, and the writing has me in a chokehold, like wow. It does its characters new and old such a service, and it's staggering to me that more people aren't talking about how well this game is written. Anyways, as a D&D enjoyer myself, I played a lot of the early access. I've wanted to make a video like this for a while now, and now I finally can because the full game is out and I've nearly beat it. I can go on and on about this game. I will later, actually. I've been recording a lot of footage. But I wanted to go over a lot of rule changes that they made to 5e and ones that I really like and I'm gonna use in my games, and also some other rules that I'm not a fan of. The rules I dislike aren't really me criticizing the video game per se, but more a contrast to what rules work really well in a video game, but don't in a tabletop setting. I think there's a lot we as DMs and players can take away from this game and put into our games. And so I wanted to go over which ones I value and which ones I don't really do that with. But we're gonna run right through these lest my ADHD takes over and I'll start rambling about how much Gale makes me feel things. Just before we do that, if you are looking for animated art pieces to use in your D&D games, you should check out James RPG Art, a friend of mine who makes amazing art pieces for any kind of campaign. He's got lots of cool art pieces that you can use to set the scenes in your games, but not just any scene. He's done the pre-writtens like Wild Beyond the Witchlight, Ram of the Frost Maiden, Tomb of Annihilation, Lost Mines of Phandelver, Descent into Avernus, and like every single location in Curse of Strahd. I didn't even know. Some of these I didn't even know were a thing. And they're all animated. I've been a longtime fan of James. We've used his art pieces on Arcane Arcade and we love his stuff. You can and should check out his Patreon in the description. You get access to like every single thing he's ever made. He's a solo creator and artist, so give him some love. He definitely deserves it. He makes really, really cool stuff and I love it so much. Okay, all right, let's get back to the video. Bonus action potions and throwing potions. I wasn't a big fan of healing potions being a bonus action for a while, just in general. Being able to heal that quickly and easily felt broken for some classes. Also, it seemed like it would be a lot more work on my side as a DM to make combat a lot more challenging if healing is really easy. But I think Baldur's Gate 3 has really convinced me. My thought process on that was entirely on paper. Being able to use your bonus action to just get a little bit of healing is sometimes necessary for the combats in Baldur's Gate 3. I think this strategizing thought process was something that I thought would be lost on my players if they had that much healing ability. The thing that I forget is that using a bonus action in combat is still using a pretty valuable resource. This instead entices me as a DM to make more challenging combats, not hold back with monsters, because now healing is a little more easily remedied. So now I'm like full 180. I'm gonna be like throwing out as many potions as possible. I want everybody to have a bunch of them, and then probably run with the rule where if you use your bonus action, you roll the dice, but if you use your action, you get the full dice roll from the healing of the potion, like the full calculation, which I think will feel great for players to have that option instead of locking them out of the turn to be able to heal, or even worse, wasting your turn. The other thing that I love that Baldur's Gate 3 did with potions is that you can throw them. This is a game changer. Throw healing potions on dying allies, or even a potion of speed, resistance, or even a poison on enemies. Potions become a lot more versatile in general once you add this ability into the game, and it's something I'm going to be running with in the future of my games to add a new level of versatility and depth to combat. Bonus action spell limitation, or the leveled spell, 2 leveled spells in a single turn limitation thing. A long time heated debate within the D&D 5e community as to whether or not to allow 2 leveled spells to be cast in a turn. Because normally in D&D 5th edition, you can only cast 1 leveled spell a turn, and then your bonus action or your other action has to be a cantrip, or not a leveled spell. I have often stood by this rule, as I believe that there are some spell combinations that can be really insanely powerful and broken if done on the same turn. And in a way, I still kind of agree with this ruling because Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't have every single spell. Oh, and now that I'm getting ahead of myself here, Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't have this limitation. You can cast as many leveled spells a turn as you can if you want to. And in Baldur's Gate 3, from among the list of spells that are a bonus action, it ain't that broken. If anything, it's a really cool combo of spells that you can trigger off. Makes you really feel like a spell slinger when you're misty stepping into a burning hands or misty stepping into a spiritual guardians. That spell is really broken and I'm not going to get into it. I think in my games, what I'm going to do is change the text of certain bonus action spells like Misty Step, where it basically overrides that rule. That way we could still have the overall rule just in case there is some broken combo in there that I'm not thinking of currently at the moment, but allowing for some spells to have that freedom beyond the limit because it's cool and fun and I think it's neat. This is my favorite way to track food and water now. In Baldur's Gate 3, you don't get a full rest unless you consume a bunch of camp supplies like food and water and other stuff. Tracking survival and hunger and dehydration is something I feel like a lot of people don't do in their games. It's a real hassle. I totally get it because I've done it in my games and sometimes we start with it and then we forget about it and then we just don't run with it and it's annoying. But tracking it at the end of the day, right before you do a long rest, I think removes that hassle. Now you don't have to think about when you ate or when you're supposed to or how much you're supposed to or how many levels of exhaustion you're supposed to have and how many hours it's been since the last time that you did it and when does it overlap and when do you have to make the save or the one inevitable player character who runs out of rations and then everybody else has to share with them so then they just buy like a bunch and oh God. Instead of any of that, you just right before long rest, you compile what you've got in the party camp supplies and then you just do it and my ring just flew off my hand. It's gone. Now you don't have to track that anymore. I think I'd alter a little bit from the video game though to make a little bit more sense in the tabletop version. I'd add up how much the party needs per day, food and water wise. So if the party is like 4 players, 5 players, 6 players, it can differentiate. And then we'd assign a score to it, or we can do pounds or gallons or whatever, but round that all up to like equal a single number. And then right before you like when everybody's going, we're going to long rest, do you have all the supplies that you need? Or the way I want to do it is like, I'll keep track of their party supply stuff, and then whenever they go to long rest, I say, okay, you can long rest because you can use all this food. But your party can do it too if they'd rather do it themselves. That's totally fine too. So I sometimes like to go into my Baldur's Gate 3 camp supplies and I'm like, we're having soup and we're having bread and we're having potatoes. But I think it would be fun for like the ranger, the druid player character who wants to hunt, maybe more the ranger, or any player character who wants to hunt. And you can be like, okay, you find like 10, 20 camp supply. And then create food and water actually becomes like a super useful spell. And then if you don't meet the requirement, you can do one of two methods. You can do it like the video game where you don't get a full long rest and instead you get half of all of your per long rest abilities back. So like half your spell slots, half your per long rest abilities, and then also half your hit points. Or you can do levels of exhaustion, which is where, you know, that works too. Or you could do both and you could let each player pick which one they want. So they can either take a level of exhaustion or get half of their stuff back. And that's always fun to give them the choice of like, do you want a level of exhaustion or do you want this instead? And the way I'm gonna do it is I'm gonna run with the 1 D&D exhaustion rule, which is my favorite way to do exhaustion, which is it's not 1 to 6 and 6 is death and each level has a random thing. Instead, it's a -1 to all of your rolls based on how many levels of exhaustion you have. So if you have 1, then it's -1, then if you have 2, it's -2, and if you get to 10, you die. And that's a really easy way to track it. And you know, players don't want to have minuses to their D20 rolls, or do they? But I mean, most of the time it's probably not going to happen because the players aren't going to be able to, players want a long rest. Players want to be able to do that. So just gives a reason to be able to like have food and water in the game and to be able to spend resources on that and spells and stuff. I really like it. I think it's a fun way to do it. Unless a mummy shows up and rots all their food and then they can't long rest. The silence spell. This is not even a new ruling. This is just an observation. I mentioned it in my overpowered spells video. Baldur's Gate 3 just made me realize how powerful this spell really is. If you're in a silence area, you can't talk, there's no sound. Immune to thunder damage, because thunder damage is literally sound. Like thunder damage is sound. There's silence, can't do it. And that means you can't speak the verbal components to your spells. And so many spells have verbal components. This is basically an anti-magic aura light. You can still concentrate, but you can't cast spells while you're in it. It is such a easy way to displaced spellcasters who are sniping in the corner. Use this more in your games. It's such a good way to get your Magic players to move around and think more about the battlefield if there's certain areas where they can't cast certain spells, but maybe they can go into them to protect them from spellcasters, or maybe your players can cast it on your spellcasters, and it's so good. And it's not mean like counterspell or dispel magic where it's just like, no, you don't get to do that anymore. You don't get to have that. Like, you're done. Instead, it's more of like you start your turn and you're like, well, what am I gonna do about this? And I think that's really fun. Guidance and Bardic Inspiration as a reaction. So it's not actually a reaction. In the game, when you roll a check, you can decide to add a Guidance or a Bardic Inspiration in right then instead of beforehand. I love this a lot more, and it's just made me want to turn those two abilities into reactions anyways. At least you have the option. You can like do it as an action beforehand, or you can do it as a reaction. Basically just an easier and cool way to rule those abilities. Like, you roll and you fail a check, and then the Bard or the Cleric can, you know, throw in their Guidance or Bardic Inspiration, and it makes them feel cool for helping out, and it helps them succeed a check. And I think that's a way more fun to use those abilities instead of D6 added to your roll. Oh geez, I forgot, and I don't need it actually. Elemental surfaces. So this one's a little tricky because it's kind of in the video gamey territory. By that I mean, might be a little difficult to do in a tabletop setting. Some people don't use maps, and some people don't want to bog down combat with stuff like this, and that's totally fine. But this is my video, and I use maps and TV table like my life is on the line, so you bet your bugbear booty I'm gonna be throwing acid areas down on the ground that reduce your AC temporarily, or fire's gonna spread and when you walk through it you take damage, or there's gonna be water and electricity like lights the whole thing, or if there's ice that turns it back into water, you could use fire to turn ice into water, which you could use for the electricity, or you could put out fire with water or ice, and the ice can be slippery, or you can have grease that's slippery and explosive. That's so fun to me. It makes combat feel super dynamic, and your spells feel really catastrophic, and there's so much more thought that can go into the game and what can happen in a combat. Oh, I love it. But I don't want my fireball to just like burn everything nearby. Like, the spell doesn't say that, and it's kind of annoying because you can like destroy loot or important stuff, and I just, it's a spell, it's magic, I don't really want it to do that. Well, I like that there's consequences for your actions, Oppenheimer, and it also gives value to taking spells like Create Water, Sleet Storm, or being an Evocation Wizard. Oppenheimer being an Evocation Wizard. Oh, that's dumb. Not using squares. These rules sort of became a descending list. Like, up here we've got the more reasonable ones, and then as we continue downwards, it's slowly descending into madness. I have no argument for this one. I just hate squares. Hexes are a little better, but it's still so limiting. I want to stand where I want. I want to measure where things go. I want accurate geometry. I want to use the Pythagorean theorem on a character who's above and ranged at a distance in a triangle. Google has an easy calculator. Rulers take 2 seconds to whip out. It is a simple sacrifice to be able to stand wherever you want on the battlefield. Oh, he's large, so that means he's this many squares, and then he has to move in those squares. And then to see him, you have to get your corner to one of his corners, then another corner to... Now, can you see him? Do this. I'm trying to look. I'm trying to use your eyes. Can you see him? Then you can see him. I want to use my eyeballs. Get these squares out of my face. Thank you, Larian, for this. It makes my brain feel so good that I can stand wherever I want instead of being confined into the tiny boxes that hold us in an eternal prison because people would rather count than just measure. Oh my God. Reckless attack reaction. As a barbarian, when you do a reckless attack, you can miss and then decide to do the As a barbarian, when you do your reckless attack, you can miss and then decide to re-roll the hit as your reckless attack instead of it just being advantage. I like that a lot. That's super fun. Revivify only working on player characters. Okay, hear me out. Hear me out. I have a little bit of an issue with death in D&D. Okay, instead of this turning into a whole other video and a rant, let me just say the basics in as few words as possible. Death, important. Person die, part of life, interesting story. When a not person die and come back to life whenever, effect nullified. Death, not so bad. World, a change. Not kind of story I like. Player characters are powerful, have cool abilities, fight monsters, die a lot. Legendary status. Okay to come back sometimes. Also, it's a game. Less fun to die, unless story. But NPC? People not at table? Death be death. Death be scary. Me like death's scary story. Ally bucket kick? Have effect. No effect if brought back instantly, but okay for player. They die lot, with some limits. Maybe special magic item or plot device that allows this. I have no idea if that made sense. XP. Contrary to popular belief, I like XP a lot. Milestone, I guess, is just easier, so we use it more. But as a player, I love receiving XP, and as a DM, I love giving out XP as a reward. I just don't like how it's rewarded in 5e. Baldur's Gate 3, you get XP for fighting monsters, but it is not whatever the CR is or anything. Instead, there's more of a focus and placement on story. Defeating an enemy that was powerful or a major player gets you a lot of XP, leading it to sort of feel a little more like Milestone, but with all the fun of XP. So you get a little number and you get to put it into the amount that you have, and you get to watch your little bar tick up, and you know when to expect your next level up, instead of the average Milestone game where players are begging their DM for level up at the end of every session because they have no idea when it's going to happen. Or the DM will tell them during certain story moments when it's going to happen, so the players ignore everything else around them and just focus on the story because they know that's when the level up is. Instead, you just give them little bits of XP so they know that it's gonna happen soon, and doing stories and side quests and other stuff like that is going to give them XP. And I love hearing XP over do we level? So yeah, I don't have any hard or fast rules for this. I just think that XP is more fun if you just relate it around not fighting monsters and challenge rating, which is ridiculous, but you know, to each their own. Do whatever you want to do. Inspiration. This is a small one, but I just really like that the game tells you how you can get inspiration with some of the various characters. I think this is something that you can do as a DM when you're unsure to award it. Maybe in session 0 with each character, you can work out 2 or 3 triggers that can be points when you award inspiration to them, like doing a good act or witnessing some insane magic or cheating somebody out of their possessions. This is a wacky idea, but you could also do a thing where you could have like 12 for each character, and then each session you could roll randomly on which inspiration trigger it is for the game, and then whenever they do it, that's when they get the inspiration. And they could be pretty vague, but then the player doesn't know what it is like for the game session, which in a way motivates them to act in character a little more without trying to hoard or, you know, Jones for the inspiration at any given character moment. Or it'd just be like me and I just forget and be surprised and be like, oh, cool. I did my character thing. Help action. You can use the help action in Baldur's Gate 3 to get players and characters back up from the death saving throws. I like this rule. Same with the potion thing. You can basically spend your whole turn getting an ally up from being down without healing. It's a nice option at least. I also like to run the dying condition. Go watch my stun video where you're, you know, basically not unconscious. You still get like a mini action. I think in my future games, I'm just going to be giving players like magic items or like a plot relevant item of some kind that, you know, explains why they can not die, and maybe Revivify only works on them, like a tadpole of some kind, you know, like in Baldur's Gate 3. But it basically explains all of these things and why they're different than like the average person. But you know, I'm just throwing ideas out there. Blinded. Blinded is pretty neat in Baldur's Gate 3 because it's not that you can't see at all, it's that you can only see out to like 5 feet. So you can still do some of your need to see abilities, but you have to be like really, really close in order to do it, which I think is kind of fun. And it's also a little realistic because you could always like flap your arms around. Like that's always something you can do as your character. Short rest, HP, just boom, done. I don't know what to call this one. Whenever my players short rest, I think I'm gonna do away with like the decreasing hit dice rule because it takes forever. Instead, what I think I'm gonna do is have like calculations ready for whatever their hit dice is, and whenever they take a short rest, I will just roll it, just go boop and be like, you heal this, you heal this, you heal this, you heal this, you know, factor in their constitution modifiers and factor in Song of Rest or anything like that. That way we can have more of a focus on what they're getting back on that short rest rather than rolling all those hit dice back and forth. I just love that in Baldur's Gate 3, you just go boop and they're healed and it's done, and oh, it's so easy and nice. Things I dislike, and I don't know if that, not really dislike, just don't think will work very well in a tabletop setting. 2 short rests. Okay, so at first this was something that I really liked. I liked the idea of limiting how many short rests you could have in a game. It would work in tandem with the not taking away hit dice rule. Plus, it would get around the party constantly short resting and getting materials and spell slots back.
Off we go then.
But as I thought about it more, the base D&D rules already have a pretty good limitation. You need an uninterrupted hour, and that's something you don't need in the video game. And an uninterrupted hour, in my opinion, is a pretty good limitation. Having the players think in a manner of time rather than the amount of resources they can spend, because they already have a billion of those anyways, is a lot more interesting to me. Plus, short rests allow for fun RP moments. So yeah, this is just one of the rules that I saw and I was just like, ooh, I should, maybe not. Maybe that's a video game thing. Bonus action shove jump. This is a weird one. In the video game, it costs your bonus action to jump or shove, which I think is neat for the video game because there are some characters and classes that don't do a whole lot with their bonus action. And having this option lets them have more options on their turn. On the other hand, in D&D, it kinda costs nothing to do those things. Shoving uses your attack action, which means you could use it with an extra attack, and jumping is limited to your movement. In the video game, they give you a lot more freedom with jumping because the whole run and jump thing I think is really weird to try and incorporate into the game. But D&D's current limit I think is really good. Plus, it is really weird to have your rogue use a cutting action to dash and then be unable to jump because jump is only your bonus action. Actions are really weird in D&D, and that's why action points or the 3 action system in Pathfinder 2e is far superior and way better and a lot more fun and gives players a lot more options and freedom within combat to be able to do whatever they want. Counter charm. Larian, why did you keep counter charm the same? It's so bad, and you kept it bad, and you made Frighten worse. There's so much charm and Frighten in the game, and counter charm sucks. What? Frighten. At first I was like, oh, Frighten's kind of cool. Instead of making it so you can't like run, you have to run away, or you can't, you just can't move at all. So it makes spells like Fear like a lot more powerful because it'll keep everybody in like one spot. It's like a mass grapple, and that's really neat. And that gives a lot more spells some versatility. And I think I want to run this in my game. And then after like the 300th combat, I was like, nope, this is really stupid and dumb, and I hate it. So this works in the video game because in D&D you can only not move towards the person you're afraid of. And I have to think this was difficult to either design or program, or otherwise didn't feel good to play because you can't undo your movements in the game. So I have to imagine if you were frightened and then moved backwards, you just got locked out of moving back to where you were. And that already happens in the game sometimes. Sometimes you just accidentally use some of your movement and it's just like, okay, that was dumb. But with Frighten, that could be extra frustrating. But in D&D, that's just not a thing. You can be like, oh no, actually, I wanted to go here. Actually, oh, I can't stand there. Okay, got it. And your movement is already impeded. Plus, in D&D, maybe you don't want to move away from the source of your fear, and you just want to stay there, and that's already going to happen in the game. And with normal Frighten, like in D&D, you just have the option instead, and that's better. More options, good. All right, that's pretty much it. I'm sure I'm gonna have a lot more that I'm gonna want to say in the future as I get through my second and third playthrough of the game and eventually ramble off topic in my other videos and just it all circles back into Baldur's Gate 3. But for now, this is how this game put a lot of rules and game mechanics from 5th edition D&D into perspective for me, and how I'm going to possibly change how those rules and spells and abilities and things work. Can't wait to try out some of these new ones. And what? Mage Hand is once per short rest? It's a cantrip! What?